Perfect. Okay, now it's recording. That's great. Thank you. So you can just go back to the slides.
Okay.
So now that it's recording, we're going to post it on our website after, so people can listen to it as well.
Okay.
I guess we'll get going in about 3 minutes.
No, wait, I'm not able to move the slides now.
Oh, you're not?
No. I'm trying to move them and they're not moving.
Monica, do you have control over them?
I mean, okay, let me see. If I'm changing, do you see them changing?
No, I don't.
So I don't have control over them.
I'm moving them. Do you see me moving them?
No, I don't see. Oh, yes, I do.
Well, now I'm moving them, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
good. I had to go back and start in the list.
Okay.
Oh, I see.
That was where the problem occurred.
Okay. We got 2 more minutes, and then we'll probably get started. I can do the intro since I think Kevin is going to be running late.
Now, Kristen, why do you just have a blank head there?
Well, I'm not on webcam.
Oh.
But you probably don't see me. You know, the network, the national network, the other participant that you see in the list, that's Monica. And she doesn't have a webcam on her computer, and I'm just not on webcam.
I only see just a head and me down in the lower right-hand corner.
Because it's not on. Maybe I should turn it on for now. Do you see me now?
Yes, we see you.
Okay. I guess if I'm gonna do the intro, I can be on and then I can just shut it off. You can hear me too, correct?
Well, it's really nice to see you because I've never actually seen you.
Me too. Yeah, kind of not fair, right? Like we talked last time, I didn't have the webcam on. This time I do. Okay, it's just now turned 1 o'clock, so if you'd like, we can...
Let's start.
Okay. All right, so I see 19 attendees are now on, so welcome everyone to the Network for Social Work Management webinar. John, can you proceed to the next slide? We're here with Dr. John Tropman. We're doing this webinar on, and John, just correct me if I get the title wrong, Producing Efficient Meetings, is that correct?
Excellent.
Okay. But before we launch into the content, we just wanted to say just a few words about the network and some things that we're doing. As you see on the slide, you know, as of July, we've opened up our membership for free, and when you join, we offer lots of benefits. We offer lots of networking opportunities. We have chapters, 4 or 5 chapters around the country now, LA, San Diego, Portland, New York City, where they hold great networking events. In the future, we're going to be launching our networking, our mentorship program. And if you don't already know, which you probably do, we have our national conference coming up this June 5th and 6th in Boston. So I hope that you are all registered to attend. And as you know, we have these webinar series, and we are doing these topics once a month. Next slide. Again, as I said, we're producing efficient meetings with presentation from Dr. John Tropman. And I think you're really going to enjoy this presentation. It'll give you lots of handy tips for how to produce your most efficient meetings possible. Next slide. Just a little bit about Dr. Tropman here. You know, he has a new book out, Effective Meetings, Improving Group Decision Making. It's available on Amazon, so all you have to do is type in that title if you'd like to purchase the book. And here is a little bit about what that book is about. Handy guide for anybody. Next slide. Okay, now I'm going to hand this off to Dr. Tropman and enjoy the content.
Well, good afternoon, everybody from the University of Michigan. It's a pleasure for me to be with you. The webinar will run about 1 hour. I'll be presenting material for about 40 or 45 minutes, and then we can have some Q&A to wrap it up. You can send in questions, and I'll try to respond to them as best I can. The staff that are working with this webinar might consolidate them a little bit, but you can always contact me at my University of Michigan email address, tropman@umich.edu. So let's begin. Generally speaking, meetings are the subject of negative humor. I put a little slide here. Meetings, the practical alternative to work. There's a camel there. The saying behind that camel is a horse assembled by a committee. So we don't really take meetings seriously, and unfortunately, that's a very costly mistake to make. There are numerous dysfunctions, high cost, and rotten decisions. Our hope is that we can provide, based on some of the research I've done here at the Meeting Masters Research Project, a better way to do it. There is a better way to do it, and the people that I've talked with and interviewed have been extremely successful in producing effective meetings. So what is it that really goes wrong all the time? Well, frequently there's no agenda, there are no conclusions, there's rework, which means meeting again and again and again, over-participation by some, under-participation by others, topical wanderings, distractions. And with all of that going on, it's amazing that we get anything done of a useful nature. Generally speaking, my research indicates that we meet about 2 times as often and or 2 times as long as necessary. So you can imagine the cost of all those people meeting again, and just add that cost up, and you can see that there's money to be saved as well as quality to be improved. Now, why do things go wrong so badly and so often? Well, let's start by saying that because meetings have a bad press, that generates the self-fulfilling prophecy. Our expectations are low, therefore we don't prepare, therefore we're not ready to work when we get together, therefore things do go badly, and the fact that they go badly confirms our initial low expectations. It's a perfect example of what Jim Collins calls the doom loop. Things just keep getting worse and worse and worse. We need to get out of that cycle. So what can we learn and what can we do to fix it? Well, my research involves interviewing about 300 plus men and women who had the reputation of running excellent meetings. My students and I observed them, we taped them, we discussed with them, and here is what they did. And interestingly, and perhaps not surprisingly, there was a lot of commonality in what they did. And I have been able to put this together in a package that is pretty easy to apply, but I should caution you that even though it's not tough, you'll meet resistance because people are committed to the practices that they have done over time, and even though they could do it better, they don't want to do it. It's a little bit like that stone in the shoe problem. You know you have to stop and take your shoe off and take the stone out, but you don't. You just keep walking with it and complaining about it. So these people are basically meeting maestros, and Their process was excellent. It was organized and authentic, and by authentic, I mean that the meeting that you're in is the real deal. It's the real meeting. It's not a fake meeting. I'm sure we've all participated in numerous fake meetings where decisions had already been made and there was the pretense of participation. The right people were there. The people were able to participate. They didn't always get their way, but they felt they were heard, and decisions got built. The reason that I use the word build is because components of the decision were decided upon element by element, sort of like building a menu, and I'll come back to the concept of a menu in a little bit when we get to the agenda. And then there was a step back, and everybody took a look at the overall menu and how everything fit together. So the decisions that were made in these meetings were of high quality. They were made on time. They were innovative and creative. The process was more like a play than anything else, and people really enjoyed themselves. When that happens, we reverse the doom loop and get to the flywheel. That's another one of Mr. Collins's ideas. In the case of the flywheel, energy builds from success. And what the people I interviewed were able to produce was an accomplishment-driven experience that made people wish to return and have that experience again. There are 4 principles that I will share with you this afternoon. There are a few more in the book, but these really are the key ones. The orchestra principle, the 3 characters principle, the high-quality decisions principle, and the flywheel. And you can see the flywheel on the right-hand side of the slide. Let's take a look at the orchestra principle first. The people I interviewed said that a meeting is like an orchestra performance. It has a score, which is an agenda. It has a conductor, that would be the chairperson. It has a hall or place that is convenient to meet. And it is at the end of a period of planning and practice. If we ran orchestras like we run meetings, you'd go into the orchestra hall and the conductor would come out and say, well, we don't really have any pieces selected. We'd like you to sort of share what you'd like to hear, and we'll see if we know it. And, of course, there's chaos. Finally, about 10:30 or so, the conductor comes back out and says, well, we've got the pieces that we're going to play, but, of course, only a few people are left. The conductor goes on to say, unfortunately, due to time, the oboist has to leave to catch a plane to get to the next performance, so we've asked him to come out and play all the oboe notes right now. And you would say, well, that is ridiculous. How can you do that? But meetings are like that. You're sitting around a table, the door opens, a member comes in and says, I've got another meeting, but here's my view. Yes, yes, no, not a chance. Been great working with you. See you later. You can't get successful work done under those conditions. The purpose principle is related. The people that I interviewed said there's only 3 things you do at meetings. You decide things, you brainstorm about things, and you announce things. Only the first 2 count. So we're going to try to get rid of the weekly meeting where we all go around and tell everybody else what we've been doing. People say, well, it's always good to get together, and then somebody says to see if there was any point in having got together. So if you don't have one of those 2 purposes, decision or action, or brainstorming about future items, cancel. You'll be saving time right away. The interesting thing about the purpose principle is that it evolves into the 3 characters principle. The people I interviewed organized their meeting by the character of the items, not by the characters in the room. So all the announcement items, and there were just very few of them, about 5% of the meeting agenda is announcements. All the rest are posted or attached. Then there was the main part of the meeting, which was decision items, and then at the end of the meeting, brainstorming items. And the brainstorming items were really based on future items that needed a little pre-discussion so that there could be some ventilation of feelings before you actually got down to the decision point. The reason that order matters is because the announcements begin the meeting by sort of getting people together, but it's a very brief period of time. Then there's action. Action really happens right away. But decisions, which we often tend to avoid, tear at the fabric of group cohesion. So about 2/3 of the way through the meeting, you finish your decision item, stop deciding, and go into brainstorming. Brainstorming has the property of getting people looking ahead, working together, winners and losers alike, and so they can end on a happier and more cheerful note. It's a way to repair the tears that decision-making makes and leaves people feeling better than they would have if you push decision-making to the end and then the winners leave one door and the losers another. So those are the main things to keep in mind for starters, and let me just review them very, very quickly with you. One is, it's a performance. You have to prepare, and generally speaking, every hour of preparation will save you 2 to 3 downstream in terms of rework, so it's definitely worth it, even though people are always saying, I don't have time to prepare. Keep in mind that instead of organizing the meeting by the people, you're going to organize the meeting by topic. Few announcements, followed by decision, followed by brainstorming. And that wraps up the meeting. Now there are some rules, so this is a little bit more of the detail, and I would invite you to listen and then go back and review it to see sort of what it means, because I think it's pretty straightforward, but you may want to look at it more than once. So the first thing you manage is information, and there are 3 rules under the managing of information piece: the rule of halves, the rule of 3/4, and the rule of 6. The rule of halves is the organizing rule. From the end of the last meeting until the halfway point between it and the next meeting is when you get agenda items brought to you as a chairperson for organization. That's how you know what goes where. The rule of 3/4 is when you send it out. So if it's a weekly meeting, let's say Friday morning, by about Wednesday morning, you've got the agenda items in front of you. About Thursday, you send it out, Thursday morning. You don't want to send it out too early because people won't read it. You don't want to send it out too close to the meeting because people don't read it. And here's a tough thing for you. Don't hand anything out at meetings. Don't bring copies. If you bring copies, you're going to teach people not to bother reading it because you go over it once the meeting begins. So you have to educate them that the deal is this. They come prepared, and you assure them that that preparation will be a good investment because you will actually talk about the items that they were asked to read. Several other people whom I interviewed said, well, I don't really read stuff because we never discuss it anyway, so there's really no point in it. We always get distracted. The rule of 6 is simply the brainstorming rule. At least a sixth, and it's better if it's a third of the items, are downstream items for upcoming topics, and that goes at the end of the meeting. The rule of halves is this is just another slide that talks about the rule of halves. The rule of 6, another slide that talks about the brainstorming items, and then we get to managing the process. The rule of 2/3 is an important rule because it's at the 2/3 point that people's attention begins to wane. So if it's an hour-long meeting, about 2/3 of the way through, maybe 3/4 of the way through, your attention will begin to wander. So about 1:45, you're going to be a little bit doing that. Will he stop on time? Are the kids at home trashing the house? Those are the kinds of questions that come up. So another reason for having brainstorming at the end is that it is more evocative, it's more creative. It tends to bring you back a little bit from that inevitable drift. And so we want to be sure that we're getting people as fully engaged as possible for the shorter time that we're going to ask them to meet. There's a design, the agenda bell, that you'll see in a second. And this is sort of how the meeting is going to be organized. So let's take a look at the agenda bell. Meetings can be graphed as a sort of curve of time over energy. So you start a little bit at a low energy point, and you rise in the middle of the meeting to the highest energy point, and then as you cross over the middle part to the 2/3 part, energy begins to decline a little bit. So we're going to try to use this structure as a way to capture the energy of success and drive forward to the decision point with us. So basically, it's a 7-category agenda. Number 1 is minutes, if you have minutes. Approve them and move on. If you don't have a quorum, approve them anyway and reapprove them later. You don't wait for a quorum or spend an inordinate amount of time on minutes. Get people to send you their suggestions ahead of time under the rule of halves. Category 2, a few announcements. And then we go to category 3. Now there can be a 3A and a 3B and a 3C. And these are easy or modest decision issues. Items that do need approval formally, but they're not really that controversial. If you're a board of directors, this is frequently called the consent agenda. And the items are passed or approved in a batch. You can do that too here. But you want to get people in the mode of making decisions as early as possible. Category 4 are modestly tough decisions. You know, and you know this from the rule of halves, because you had a chance to look over the material ahead of time, you'll know that there are some differences of view on category 4 items, 4A, 4B, and so you put them there. We've had some success with category 3, so that's going to enhance the probability of success with items 4. And let's assume for a moment we do well there, and we go to item 5. Item 5, there's only one item 5, and it is the toughest item for that agenda. Now you'll notice where it's placed. It's the highest energy. You're going to have most participants. You're going to have most energy. You will be coming off some successes. So you're giving it your best shot. And let's assume that for the moment we can get agreement on it, even though it is difficult. And then we move into brainstorming, which is the sort of repair part, but it has some other functions too. I mentioned that it allows people to ventilate a little bit. Brainstorming at the end is the equivalent of the 10-minute warning for kids. Emotion is expressed so that when it comes up next meeting or 2 meetings down the pike, it won't be quite as effectively charged as it might otherwise have been. It also acts as a spring at the back of your meeting. We're going to talk about putting times beside each item. You'll see that in a minute. But that isn't always going to work out, and so we have the ability to squeeze the brainstorming time a little bit in order to give a little bit more time to some items that just need that little extra time to wrap up. Now suppose an item 4 really doesn't get to any agreement, and you look at the time and you have to sort of make a judgment call. If your judgment is that a few more minutes will do it, retime the agenda a little bit and take those few more minutes. If your idea or judgment is that, well, really probably no, then you bracket it and take it up after item 5. Clearly suboptimal, but better than having it stall out your entire meeting. If, when you're discussing it after item 5, it becomes clear that you're not going to achieve a conclusion, then you can change it into a brainstorming item and get some more opinions and ideas out. Brainstorming items, you sometimes start with quite a few alternatives. A good goal to work toward is to get them down to 3 options, particularly with item 5. If you only have 1 option, there's nothing to decide. If you have 2 options, that has a high probability of dividing the group. If you have 4 options, it's like 2 only worse. And if you have 5 options, people begin to group them. So we have 2 Asian restaurants and 3 Italian restaurants. 5 is too many, apparently, for most of us to simultaneously compare and contrast. 3 is about it. So keep that as a sort of goal for yourself. Won't always work, but it frequently is really good. I put the urgent important grid here to show how you can map Covey's urgent important grid into the agenda bell. And you want to be sure that you're attending to the non-urgent but important items. Those are the ones that are most likely to get kicked down the road, and those are the ones that are most likely to cause you big trouble when they finally do surface. Now, we're going to manage the words as well, and there are 2 big word-based items that I want to chat with you about, the agenda and the minutes. So let's take a look at the agenda. Most agendas are basically useless. I was on a PTO when my daughter was in the 2nd grade, and they sent out the same formulaic agenda every meeting. Old business, really old business, new business, matters arising, principals report. You looked at that and it had no content to it whatsoever. So what we're going to do, and what the people I interviewed suggested, is to use a model based on a restaurant menu. Restaurant menus convey a lot of information. And if you do it right, then people will be able to actually think about each item ahead of time, just as you would think about the various dishes when you look up a restaurant menu online. So let's take a look and see what it would be like. Here's a sample agenda item, and you will see that we start out with minutes, and there are a few announcements, some new desks are ordered. And notice what's been done here. Under each heading is a specific topic, new desks ordered, $1,000 more to your account, so that people know exactly what the announcements are. And that's what restaurants do. They'll have the dish, and then under it, they'll have a little explanation about the dish. So we can go to item 3, retreat location. Key West seems best. Probably nobody's going to disagree with that, but we've got to have formal approval. And as we go through, we see item 5. There has been a proposal to rebudget our budget to allow for a budget line of cash available for innovation as opposed to program assignment. It's going to be controversial. People can see that that could be good, but it also means somebody or all of us will have less money in our sub-budgets. And item number 6 is the brainstorming item. Let's have some half-baked idea meetings in order to let people have permission to share some weird and strange stuff that they might be thinking about in a permissive climate. It might not work, but then it might work as well. Now notice on the right-hand side, we have a running clock. The point to keep in mind here is that an agenda without times is like a restaurant menu with no prices. it really leaves you uncertain and wondering. So we're going to use time blocks as a way to sort of signal more important and less important items. We're going to leave a big time block for item 5, smaller time blocks for items 4A and 4B, smaller still for 3, and you don't want to use like 15 minutes and 20 minutes and 30 minutes or whatever, because then people have to add up stuff and it doesn't work well. This agenda that we're looking at right now articulates with the clock on the wall, and you can see whether you're ahead or behind. And if you're the chairperson, particularly if you're behind, this gives you a neutral way of saying to folks, hey, we're running a little behind, maybe we better wrap this item up and move on. And it's not a personal kind of thing, it's just a schedule kind of thing. The minutes. Do them, a brief record is important, but keep this in mind. Don't do he said, she said. I've discovered that when people actually see what they said in meetings, they'll deny they were present. So basically, you want to use the passive voice and say things like, the van purchase agreement was discussed, some were in favor of switching to van-based transportation for our agency, others wanted to retain the use of private cars. When you reach the decision point, you put the decision in bold and in a box like you can see on the slide. And that way, anybody who has responsibility for next steps is listed there. That allows you, shifting from your chair role to a managerial role, to call Steve, who had agreed to get some pricing on the vans, and be sure that he has that information for the next meeting. Managing the paper and the presentation. There are a couple points here worth thinking about. One is the executive summary, and the second is the options presentation technique. Many times, agendas have attachments, and sometimes those attachments are pretty lengthy. We call that the bulk packet problem or the plump packet problem. Don't do it. Send out an executive summary and put the rest of it on the web. The more you send, the less people will read. I've had a surprising amount of difficulty with this. People want to send out a lot of stuff. And even though they themselves don't want to get a lot of stuff, they want to send out a lot of stuff. The reason the 10 Commandments are here is because it sort of provides an illustration of an executive summary. When God and Moses were talking, it turned out that God had thousands of commandments. We know that because a lot of them have rolled out since that time. But Moses said, look, God, I can't have all these commandments. These things have to be chipped out on stone tablets. Most of the chippers work for the Pharaoh. It's night work for them. I've got to have something I can get around the Middle East pretty easily. And so we got the 10 Commandments. For those of you who have watched History of the World, you'll know there were originally 15 commandments, but Moses dropped one of the tablets on the way down, and 10 have served us pretty well. So keep that in mind. The thinner the packet, the more likely people are to actually read, and incidentally, they'll go and read more because once they get into it, they become a little bit interested. The options presentation technique. Sometimes you have a situation in which a smaller group is preparing a report on an issue or problem, typically around an item 5, and so they come into the group and say something like, we've looked into the problem of X, here it is, and here's our proposal. Now that really creates a sort of plate tectonics problem in the group, because the small group knows a lot and has spent a lot of time on it and is probably pretty committed. The larger group really doesn't know very much. So they begin to ask questions like, did you think of this and did you think of that, which tend to irritate the people who are presenting, saying, yes, of course we thought of that. You want to do it, and if you want to do it, you do it. And so it sets the stage for argumentation. What we want to do is to get all of the folks working together. And I have a little quiz for you. Take a few seconds. I'm not going to put anybody on the spot, but I think you'll find it interesting. And it illustrates some of the stuff that is the basis for the new solution that's below. Think of all the numbers between 0 and 100 stretched out in a line or string. How many 9s in that array? The correct answer isn't 1. How many 9s between 0 and 100? Just get your answer and write it down. I think it's not going to take too long, so you probably got it. So would you check your work? Remember that to err is human, to forgive is not. Okay, so for the most part, I hope we've got our answer. We've checked our answer. Let's see how we did. If you got 20, you got the correct answer. About 1% of you will have gotten that answer. The answer I got, which was the most popular answer by far, was 11. 10 is also popular. 19 is also popular, but considerably less so. I was being shown this exercise by an economist at lunch. And so when he first asked me the question, how many 9s, I went up the right-hand column and I got 10. And then I noticed that, hey, 99 has 2 9s. So the correct answer must be 11, naturally forgetting all the other 9s in the 90s column. And I felt really good about that. I felt that's the advantage to having a PhD. You see things that other people miss. So then he asked me to check my work, and I got 11 again. I can tell you I've done this exercise quite a few times in various classes and with various groups. And people do get the right answer, just a few of them, but nobody gets it via step 1. And the reason for that is something called review for proof only. Once we get the right answer, once we get an answer that we think is right, when we get it again, we consider that proof, even though it's wrong. So then he asked me, was I certain enough to bet on it? I said yes. I thought it was a great opportunity to show an economist there was a free lunch. I did show that economist there was a free lunch, except it was his free lunch. So the point of the 9s is this. Individually, we frequently get the wrong answer. We're not good at checking our own work, so we continue with the wrong answer. But having checked it and found the wrong answer again, we become more committed to it, which leads to step 3, overcommitment, and we get into hot water. So if we can get the groups working together back and forth, we're probably liable to come up with a pretty good answer. And it's not hard to do. So if you look at the new way, we just add a step. The subgroup comes in, states the problem, and then they add something that they typically have done but don't share. Here are the 3 or 4 main options that we looked at. And of those options, we pick as a preliminary action or preliminary suggestion option 3. It's also very nice if you can use the watermark draft across the handout. So the combination of telling people the preliminary options, having draft on the actual paper, and having it headed preliminary suggestion allows a sense of freedom of discussion. And then you try to manage the discussion around 4 questions. The first is the logic question. Does it make sense? Is it logical? The second question is the judgment question. Is it good judgment? The third question, that's sort of political question, I guess you could also say, is the problems question. Are there problems in it? You do want to get to that. You don't want to start with it. If you start with problems, the presenting group thinks you're picking on them, and they'll become very defensive. But then you touch on it, and you will get some problems already resolved in the first 2. And then you go to the CQI question, continuous quality improvement. What suggestions can we make that would improve what's before us, not pick it apart? That's going to lead to a high quality decision. And then there's some norms that we manage. We respect the agenda. We respect the clock. And a couple of phrases here that sort of suggest what's important. The mind cannot absorb more than the seat can endure, and beware of comatosis rectus. That's a disease that starts with a paralysis in the lower part of the back, rises up into the mind itself, and turns off the eyeball controllers so they slip below the lower lids. If you see that, your group is in trouble. Respect people and ideas. We have a phrase here at the University of Michigan, expect respect, and we try to live by that. Body language counts, and occasionally you're going to have to call people out. If somebody is doing eye rolling or making that hidden shielded vomit gesture with their finger, you might say, Sid, have you got something that you want to share here? Instead of letting Sid surreptitiously trap or trash the presenter. So these are the main points. We're going to go to the Q&A in a second, but let me share with you 5 problems that you're going to run into as you try to implement. These come from the work of Herbert Simon, whom you will recognize as the first economics Nobel laureate, late of Carnegie Mellon University. And he said, here are the problems that you're going to sort of experience whenever you try to change something. You're going to run into inertia problems, cultural lag problems, and self-interest problems. And below in the smaller type, you see the suggestions that he makes to make them better. Make compliance easy, make non-compliance difficult. Adjust the new suggestions to prevailing values. Support people's expenses at self-interest. And the last 2 are rationality, explain it, over-explain it, and involve the people who are affected. So what I'd like to ask you to do now is to take a couple minutes and take out a sheet and write down something that you're going to try, and then you will have something to look back on. What you have in front of you is Edward Deming's plan, do, check, act, cycle, which is just sort of a really good where you plan what you want to do, you try it or do it, you check it, and then you act and improve it, and then you go through the steps again. So at this point, I'm going to stop my presentation, and I thank you for your attention, and I'm going to turn it over to our monitor for some of the Q&A period.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to now open up our Q&A at the moment. So if you could go ahead and start typing in your questions into the Q&A panel of your box on the right-hand side. We will be reading your Q&A, your questions live, and John will be able to answer them. So please go ahead and chat your questions. We'll give you a couple minutes maybe to collect your thoughts, and then we can just go ahead and launch into our Q&A. Okay, no questions. Oh, here we go. Our first question. How far in advance do you suggest the agenda be sent out? People forget.
Well, earlier in the presentation, I reviewed the rule of 3/4. So it's about the 3/4 point between the meetings. So if it's a meeting on Friday, might go out maybe Thursday morning. If it's a monthly meeting, it might go out on like in the third week, at the end of the third week. That seemed to be what the people I interviewed felt was most likely to sort of get attention close enough to the meeting so that people would look at it, and far enough, and not far enough away so that they would set it aside and then forget about it. You might want to vary that depending upon your group, and if you send it out over electronic means, people can refer back to it as well. Some people also, at about the 85% point, so that might be Thursday afternoon, let's say, would send out a quick email reminder, just as we sent out a little reminder for this one, to take a look at the agenda, and that may just be something that kicks them a bit into gear.
I have another question here. The question is, or the statement that then asks the question, we go over upcoming meetings for the week and discuss outcomes from past meetings. How do you suggest this be handled? Notes that are emailed, or can they still be included in the meeting?
Well, it depends a little bit what is meant by past actions. If that is updates, they can be handled by email unless there is a decision or action to be taken. So, for example, if I go back to the van purchase agreement, let's say that the guy looking into it discovered that the prices had gone up astronomically since there was the last discussion of it. In that case, there might have to be a revisiting of the viability of that given the new pricing. Or it may have turned out to be the opposite. There could also be a brainstorming issue. Various impediments and difficulties may have come up in something that originally was thought to be clear but now is a little bit murky. So we're going to continue with it, but we want to brainstorm a little bit about it and sort of get a little more structure on this. So that would be sort of my recommendation. It's too easy to slip into sort of a reporting mode unless you have action or brainstorming items. I hope that that addresses your question. If it doesn't, or you have a different way of, you had something different in mind, just email me and I'll respond to you directly.
Wonderful. We have another question here. Is there a limit to the number of announcements that are helpful at a meeting?
Yes, it's about 5% of the meeting space. If you go more than that, people begin discussing the announcements. People actually come to meetings wanting to participate. Announcements tend to be sort of one-way flow of information, and people will start exercising their wish to discuss by discussing the announcements. So you really want to minimize the opportunity for that and actually move into Category 3 items under the agenda bell so that people can, even though they're modest items and easy, they still can discuss them and act on them. So minimize the announcements because they really are just one-way rather than two-way communication.
Okay, I have a question here. What are suggestions for handling situations where people come late to meetings where decision-making is needed?
Well, that's a complicated question. And let me mention, by the way, that what we hope to do, this is the first of actually a two-part series. The second one is building effective decisions, and there's a whole bunch of things that happen in the process of the meeting. If the decision making is going to be really key or very important, Then what the people I interviewed did is they sent out they did a little expectation management. They sent out the 85% time and on at the 75% time too, a note saying we're going to be making a couple of decisions at this meeting, and we're going to start on time and get right into it. So if there's anything that you see as an impediment to yourself, please let me know. So they tried not to wait, and then if the person doesn't come, unless that person is the boss, you simply proceed. And otherwise, it sort of has one person as the tail that's wagging the whole organization dog, and what you're going to find is resentment among the others who came, they were ready to go, and that person didn't come, and then halfway through the meeting they show up, and if that happens, you can say, Sid, I'm glad you're here. I'll bring you up to date at the end of the meeting. We decided to go ahead with the new curriculum, and I'll give you the details. So you take the initiative vocally and sort of invite him to sit down and listen.
All right, we have one more question here. Some strategic planning folks encourage rotating responsibilities, for example, scribe or facilitator duties. What are your thoughts about the process and maintaining efficiency?
Let me ask you to read that again. I want to be sure I got all the parts.
Okay. Some strategic planning folks encourage rotating responsibilities, for example, scribe or facilitator duties. What are your thoughts about this process and I think they meant to say to maintain efficiency.
Okay. Generally speaking, I tend to go towards skills rather than sort of rotation. Some people are really good at facilitating, others just really aren't. And there's no reason to rotate just so that everybody gets a chance at it. If they're interested, they can sort of work their way into it. Generally speaking, I rely a lot more on the chairperson or meeting head to do this, so I'm not a big fan of facilitators unless there's a terribly complicated and troublesome issue where the chairperson feels the need to get in. Under Robert's rules, the chair has to actually give up the chair temporarily if they want to participate. And the chair's role is, the reason I picked the word maestro is that the maestro may be a virtuoso, but not when she or he is actually conducting the orchestra. So the job of the chairperson is not really to get her his own way, it's more to help the group arrive at a decision that is acceptable to everyone. I'll say one thing in anticipation of the next seminar. When you come to a decision point, there's 7 things that you're going to want to keep in mind. And you're going to be conceptually trying to harmonize these 7 things into a suggestion that addresses many of them. One is the breadth of preference. What do most people want? The second is the depth of preference. Who feels really strongly and can we accommodate them? The third is the involvement piece. Who's got to actually do it and what do they think? The fourth is like the science piece. What do the experts think? Lawyers, the most experienced people in the room. The fifth one is power. What does the boss think? The sixth one is stakeholders not in the room, and do we need to speak for any of them? And the last one is the idea itself, and is it complicated? Does it have a lot of moving parts? Is everything really going to fit together the way it should? Have we tested it? Do we need to do more testing? So if you look at a decision and address it in terms of those 7 things, and you think, what could we do that would meet many of those? if you weight those for your organization, if you get 2 or 3 in terms of a percent and they go over 50%, that's your decision culture. Organizations vary in terms of their decision culture, so you have to be sure that you hit the ones that are most important for the group that you're in. That's as much as I can do at the moment. But feel free to write me.
Is there any other questions? I don't see any other questions in the queue, but we still do have a little bit of time if you'd like to go ahead and chat in your questions. And I guess while people are thinking if they have any other questions, Dr. Tropman, do you want to talk a little bit more about our next webinar on this topic? And
yes,
you know,
let me just say a little bit about that, and then we can wrap things up. And this is a pretty good example. I mean, we were going to go till 2, but if we're finished, then we can finish, and that's better than all sitting quietly with our hands folded until the bell rings. So the next one is called Building Effective Decisions, and it's harder than this one. This one, if you can think of the 2 seminars, it's a little bit like Chinese cooking. The first part of Chinese cooking we just went through, which is all the chopping. And you don't want the oil to be smoking while you're still chopping. The second part is actually cooking, and so we're in a dynamic process. Once the meeting starts, it's going to be really hard. You got to be thinking on your feet. You got to be paying attention, multitasking, watching what people are doing, assessing their body language, being sure that everybody who seems to want to get in is in. And we're going to discuss a couple of things. We're going to be discussing a whole bunch of rotten decisions that have become classic, like groupthink, the Abilene paradox, defensive routines, brute-think, and the boiled frog. So we'll go through some of those to give you an idea of some very, very common rotten decisions. Then we're going to talk about some procedures for making decisions better, and then we're going to talk about some new stuff that I observed in my research that will assist you in managing decisions in a fluid dynamic setting. We're going to talk about decision crystallization, which is that point in a meeting process, at which you say, I'm going to summarize where we're at, I'm going to suggest something that we can do, and I'm going to explain why we should do this because it addresses the decision rules, and it's a really terrific process. It's going to take you a little bit longer to become good at that, but when you do become good at it, you'll really amaze your friends. It's just the people who figured it out were really super intelligent, and they knew just when to intervene. At the end of a round of discussion, we'll discuss that. So that's a little bit of a preview of what we're going to do next time, and that'll probably be, I think, toward the end of the summer. Would that be right, or very early fall?
I think we may do it next month if you're available.
Well, let me check my schedule.
Yeah, we'll work it out. I do have another question that's come in.
Okay.
This question is, I have concerns with putting the time next to each topic. Have you had any situations where people begin to bean count time spent on specific agenda items if you happen to run past the time allotted?
Yes, they do. They're more likely to bean count if you just use like 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. But managing expectations is also important here. It turns out that structure frees rather than constrains. And the people that I interviewed would say, well, we have some time by the agendas. This will assure that everybody's item gets attention, that we'll be able to end on time. So you begin to both manage people's idea that we're going to try to follow this, and they frequently say, and I hope we can all pay attention to the clock, because the goal really is to get everybody paying attention to the clock, just like all the musicians pay attention to the beat. And so with that in mind, people will sort of get on board. Initially, it's going to be a little hard. If you want to try some of this stuff, don't try it in your most important meeting for openers. Practice up a little bit and get a couple of buddies. Generally speaking, people in the change business say that you need between 10 and 15% of the people involved in the change to be on board with it. So that means in my faculty of 50, I got to have like 5 to 7 colleagues who'll be willing to support my new course. So I may have to do a little pre-work because you don't want to be alone in trying to justify this. You want to have others say, well, we've discussed it and we're going to maybe try this out and so on. So it's a process, and it'll be a little bumpy at first because people are deeply committed to what they know doesn't work well, but they don't want to change it.
Well, I don't see any more questions in the chat box. Does anyone have any last questions before we say goodbye for today?
Well, I think we're good then.
I think we're good. We don't have any more. Those were great questions, though. I thought it was very.
They were really good. Thank you for paying attention.
Yeah, no
I will
problem.
look forward to seeing some of your work.
Yeah, and thank you, Dr. Tropman, for doing this. And,
it was a pleasure.
And after this event, to all of the attendees, we will be posting a recording and a PDF file of these slides on the network's website. So look for that email within the next day or so with directions on where you can find this information. So again, thank you all for joining us. Look for announcements for our next webinar once we set the date for next month. And we look forward to seeing everyone at our annual conference, our annual training conference, June 5th and 6th in Boston. So thank you all for joining us.
If you can just wait 1 second, there's one more thing I can share with you. A good way to start a change process is to use a little technique called KSS, and that simply stands for Keep, Stop, Start. So if you pick a meeting that you want to change, start by saying to people, write down what we should keep on doing at this meeting, what we should stop doing, and what we should start doing. Then you can begin to build a change intervention out of those collective responses. It's paper and pencil, doesn't require anything, gives you information, and a lot of people have found that very useful. So give it a shot. Thanks again.
Great tip. And again, thank you for presenting today, Dr. Tropman, and thanks to everyone for joining us.
Bye-bye. And
Bye.
Go Blue. Hello.